US President Donald Trump, in an executive order signed on Monday, paused enforcement of a federal law of Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, the FCPA. Somit joins us to tell us more about this. Somit.
Well, if you see, the US President Donald Trump has signed an executive order directing the Department of Justice to pause enforcing FCPA. Now, FCPA is the Foreign Corrupt Practice Act, which became a law in 1977, barring all Americans and certain foreign issuers of securities from paying bribes to foreign officials. Now, this law was amended in 1998 to also apply to foreign firms and people who cause such bribes to take place within the United States as well. Now, as per the US President, this move is going to mean a lot more business for America going forward, and he also said that this act sounds good on paper, but in practice it's a disaster. The US companies are harmed by FCPA over enforcement because they are prohibited from engaging in practices which are quite common by international competitors, and this not enforcing this act will make an even playing field for US companies in foreign field also, as per the president. Now, last year, the US Department of Justice had also accused Adani officials of perpetrating a bribery scheme. Now, Adani Group had called these accusations baseless as they were not charged under FCPA. But now, given the fact that the US President has paused enforcing this act, it will mean that the earlier Biden regime or Biden administration who had charged Adani Group officials with the bribery act will not be applicable, given the fact that now the current president has put a pause on this FCPA, which is the Foreign Corrupt Practice Act.
Thank you so much for getting us the details. So clearly you have Trump, who's gone ahead and signed the order pausing enforcement of foreign bribery ban. In fact, as we know, President Donald Trump has also signed an executive order directing the Department of Justice to to pause enforcing a nearly half-century-old law that actually prohibits American companies and foreign firms from bribing officials of foreign governments to obtain or retain business. The pause is being implemented to avoid putting US businesses at an economic disadvantage to foreign competitors. In fact, Trump is directing Attorney General Pam Bondi to prepare new guidelines for Foreign Corrupt Practice Act enforcement. To discuss more on this, joining us on our show is Sunil Subramaniam, market veteran, and Gopal Jain, senior advocate at the Supreme Court. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. Mr. Jain, let me come to you first. This was something which was probably anticipated. Would you say that correct? I mean, would you agree to that? How would you read this, disaster act that has been removed by Trump?
Well, maybe he played his trump card. Yes, I think sweeping changes were expected as far as the new administration was concerned, and this seems to be one. And two, his whole mantra seems to be how to help American companies be more competitive, and America first policy. So perhaps that's what weighed with him in furtherance of the goal that he had set during the campaign and otherwise, that this places them at a global disadvantage. And so it's perhaps beneficial to make them more competitive and remove this act, or at least put a pause button for the moment.
Clearly, the kind of impact that Indian companies could have seen on the back of this is what we need to look at, because we did have the Adani Group of companies which bear the brunt of something like this, right? Mr. Subramaniam, let me come to you. How would you read this in context to the markets? FCPA suspension and impact on the Adani case outcomes, because clearly the kind of downtake or the correction that we saw in terms of stock prices, which was not warranted, which was not really driven by what happened in terms of the act of the companies, but it was mainly to do with Biden's, clearly the order that they had passed, right? What would you have to say?
I would say that this clearly indicates that for Trump, more than being the president of the United States, he is acting like the chief business officer of the United States, right? So obviously in every decision, even if you look at it from the Trump tariff perspective, he has used the tariff to extract concessions for American businesses, to make America great again, American businesses great again. So this is another step there. And I think what this augurs will see, the US through this act was trying to behave like a moral god, that anywhere in the world a US company does anything corrupt, then they will be hauled up in the US. So I think obviously when they're competing with Japanese companies, Korean companies, European companies in the emerging market space, there are practices like this which are very often done. So I think that this gives a level playing field to American businesses. And I think the timing of it before Mr. Modi goes there is critical because, obviously he's seeking to promote American businesses in India. And locally, there are adjustments to be made. Now, obviously, this clears the path for more American businesses to operate in international economies and including in India. So I think the relevance in terms of timing is also very important. Then second, that it's also very clear that Trump is not going around doing soft power, right? He's not pussyfooting around it. He's there. He says, I will suspend this law. He's willing to use his executive powers to do that. So it clearly shows that he's a man of action. Now, some may like it, some may not like it. But at least you get the clarity that he's very firm on what he believes. He'll go and practice. So he's, in that sense, he's a WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. So to that extent, for the markets, right, this has been a big boost because every American company operating in India, they would always be thinking, no, somewhere some of their partners, right, they engage with subcontractors. Some subcontractor pays a bribe somewhere, that company will be hauled. Was an overhang which was probably a deterrent to American businesses going and competing in international spaces, including in India, and this will free up that. And I think the Modi-Trump discussions in terms of obviously there's going to be give and take, that America is going to try sell military energy to India, and India is obviously going to try to enhance and avoid a very severe tariff. So I think this sets the base well. The market should welcome this kind of a clarity. And specifically, I cannot comment on the Adani stocks itself specifically, but obviously any companies in India, which thanks to their linkages, either by raising securities in the US market or dealing in partnership with US companies, was under the purview of this law, will get a relief in the sense that such things will no longer be overhang on them as from a business practice perspective.
Because, you mentioned about the Adani Group of companies as well. And since this time and since the announcement has come in, you're seeing that positive reaction come in on the counters as well. Adani Enterprises, which saw strong moves, Power, Green, Energy, Total, AC, you name the companies, all of them trading in the positive in today's session. So clearly, the question is about how big an overhang was this. Mr. Jain, let me come to you, taking this point from Mr. Subramaniam into consideration, that acts like these do become an overhang for the Adani Group of companies as well, which now seems they are taken over. But now you're talking about, Pam Bondi, who will be probably issuing revised FCPA enforcement guidelines. Taking this entire scenario into consideration, how are you reading it in terms of the revision that will come through? You plus have the Modi government meet President Trump as well soon. So do you think all of this will be weaved in?
Yes, I think it's like a big package. Everything will get weaved in. And I think the key focus obviously seems to be to give a fillip to American businesses and remove this overhang which has been there. So it's sent a positive sentiment. And I think in line with the new ethos and thinking, the revised guidelines will reflect that. So I think it will be a significant change from the existing framework and structure to the proposed new framework, structure, or guidelines that they will come up with. And I think, like we say in India, perhaps this is another facet of ease of business is what they have. And it will probably generate a lot more business in America. And two, the timing of the meeting of the two leaders is important. It will give them a chance to discuss a lot more without some of the thorny or tricky or prickly issues bothering them. So I think it also, in that sense, paves the way for much more constructive dialogue on the way forward for the two countries.
Right. And Mr. Chen, do you think this will overall, remove this overhang on the Adani Group of companies as well on an end-to-end basis?
I think so. If the whole idea is to pause, reset, and restart, I think it will have a significant bearing on this. But like I said, it's the announcement at the moment, and we have to just wait for the shape of the new framework or guidelines that they come up with. But yes, it's definitely a positive start in that sense.
And yes, go on.
Sorry. No, I was going to say, for example, in India also in the last few years, we've streamlined several old acts, phased them out, come up with new enactments and laws. So perhaps even globally, people are recalibrating their business interests, and therefore laws and policies which will be supportive rather than be an overhang.
Okay. Mr. Subramaniam, clearly, you did speak about how the market should be reading this, but in future, anything of an announcement that comes like this from a foreign country, how should the Indian markets read that? Because clearly, you're seeing investors who were misguided at a lot of levels, right? And at that point in time, the stocks of those companies did collapse, because of which retailers did lose on a lot of wealth, which is not in favor. So how would you advise retail investors to then read news items like this?
So I would say that, see, this is a lot of noise. A true value of a company should be based on its business, its EPS growth, its market share growth, its competitive advantages. That's what the share market is meant for. Such announcements and this, which come from external sources and cost corrections in them, right? I would say that for retail investors, when you get into individual stocks, it's very hard to assess these, right? Whereas you hand your money over to an experienced fund manager through either the mutual fund or through portfolio management services, they will be able to look at this in the light of the fact that there is this concern. It has created a correction in the stock price, but if the core business of that company is not getting affected, maybe this correction is a time to buy. So a smart fund manager with expertise there could take actually advantage of this volatility, but a retail investor probably getting shocked would try to then sell it in the time of panic and would end up losing a lot of money. So I think the story then lies that such news which comes and affects prices don't affect the fundamental value of the company in terms of their future growth prospects. And to assess that correctly, always rely on experienced fund managers rather than going in yourself dabbling into these stocks, on such times. So my advice to them is leave that to the experts and to the people to manage it. These actions which come from an external sources are very hard for a retail investor to understand and manage. And everybody goes by the fear and greed. There's an emotional aspect to investing, and that at the time of fear, they will tend to sell it at a suboptimal price and a suboptimal time.
Well summed up, Mr. Subramaniam. Mr. Jain, clearly the DOJ in 2024 actually had announced enforcement actions in 24 cases related to alleged violation of the FCPA, and there were some 17 such actions announced in 2023 as well. Taking this quantum into consideration, do you think a lot of these cases will be nullified with the Trump government? Because clearly you are seeing a lot of concerns with the old regime.
I think the right word may be revisit or rethink on it, because you put a pause to the present enforcement guidelines, you're looking at new ones. So certainly it will give them that opportunity to rethink, re-examine, revisit this in the light of the new proposed changes that they seek to put in. So it's like a transition. You're moving from the present regime to a potentially different regime in future. So they will definitely perhaps relook and rethink the existing cases that you mentioned.
So I think a lot of things that need to be done on this end as well. Rethink, revisit, and a pause at the current level is what President Trump has spoken about. And as Mr. Subramaniam also mentioned, clearly it's the retail investors who do get stuck in this kind of noise. So it's very crucial in terms of the action that lies and what you listen to and how you place your investments overall. But thank you, Mr. Subramaniam. Thank you, Mr. Jain, so much for joining us on the show and sharing the views.